I'd like to start off by thanking everyone for showing up today, primarily Niels and Nancy and the Inform team for supporting this event, as well as people from LaSalle, as well as Vancouver Design Week for supporting not only this event, but the industry at large. Before I get started, I want to try something out here. If we can get everyone that's sitting to stand up for a sec. Trust me on this. Everyone stand up. I'd like to see who we have in the crowd today. So anyone here who is an interior designer, if we can put your hands together like this. Okay. If you're an architect, let's do this. Okay. Do we have some design enthusiasts? We can be like this. And everyone else who was just dragged here will do this. Perfect, I just got my first standing ovation. Okay, get comfortable. So it's clear that we have a lot of creatives in the room, and I'm going to gear my talk a lot about that. I'd like to talk about who I am, where I've come from, explore some of my work. But what I'd really like to do is make sure we have enough time for some Q&A at the end, so we all get the most value out of our time here together. So my name is Matthew McCormick. I'm the principal at Matthew McCormick Studio, a contemporary lighting design company based here in Vancouver. And we design our own product line. We design it and manufacture it here in Vancouver. And we also specialize in bespoke custom lighting. Sorry, one second. So where I'd like to start off is this idea of creativity. There's a great author named Mel Robbins, that talks about the unique challenges of being a creator. And so many people look at me and see some of the stuff that I do, and if that's giving talks or seeing my work popping up around town or some of the stuff I do on social media and think, I'm this or I'm that. When, truth be told, I'm just like you. I'm a creator too. But in saying that, it presents some interesting challenges. Because on one hand, I want to acknowledge the fact that what we do comes from the heart because we love it. And that's what I do. I truly love it. Yet, as Robbins goes on to talk about, in order to be successful, it requires your brain. And it requires your head. You need your head. And I think with most creators, we tend to prefer to be kind of behind the camera, opposed in front of the camera. And we prefer to be kind of heads down working. But when it comes down to promoting our work, marketing our work, or selling our work, or what the heck we're going to do today, that takes your head. We also tend to be deep thinkers, which also exposes us to anxiety and self-doubt and the imposter complex. Because when your work is an expression of you, every time you're trying to sell it, you're putting yourself on the line. And so I totally, totally get it. So I think a lot of that has to do is because this work comes from our heart, but it also requires our brain to be successful. Not to mention a good amount of hustle and a shit ton of hard work. So this is my family. This is clearly me. I can't see what you're seeing, but there I am there. I think this all started off when I was a young boy. Excuse me a sec. I grew up in a family of 7 kids, right in the middle, and 2 parents. But I always felt a little bit like the black sheep. I think that's because I've always been very dyslexic and pretty ADD. And so I used to hide myself in my room quite a bit and spend countless hours in the summer doodling away until my hands couldn't handle it anymore. But that all disappeared once I discovered girls. So what's funny is when I got out of when I got into high school, I never took art because I felt like art couldn't or shouldn't be judged. Not only that, but this was like my little outlet, and I kept it quite close. So I didn't do it for anyone else. I did it to get it out. It was kind of like that itch that you need to scratch where you can turn something from a thought into something tangible. So in high school, I opted to take shop class instead of art class so I can get my hands dirty, as well as it afforded me the opportunity to spend the next 5 years learning drafting and different drafting techniques. In tandem with that, I actually enrolled in some private art classes on the weekends, which afforded me also the opportunity to spend time with a master artist and perfect the arts of watercolor and oil painting and pencil drawing. I've got a drawing up here that I did when I was actually quite young. As a kind of funny side note, there was a time before the internet, and I think at the time I envisioned I was going to be like the next Bob Ross. But then there was this invention called the personal computer that came along, and that really kind of changed everything. Check out those sweet frosted tips, I gotta say. Oh, God. Okay. Fast forward to when I was trying to, I don't know if you're seeing this, I keep on getting tells come up, sorry. So fast forward when I was trying to figure out what could be my next move into university. And I always had this preconceived idea that you couldn't just be good at design, you'd have to be the best to be successful. So what I did is I just went to school to become the best, or become the boss of the best. And I geared all of my schooling to learn the business end of design, which included things like marketing and multimedia and entrepreneurship. And upon graduating Ryerson University with a bachelor's degree in technology, most of my classmates went more of the executive side, where I took more of the creative track and went to work in ad agencies. This gave me the opportunity to work with such brands as General Motors, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, and Best Buy. But I get asked how I made this transition and how I got myself to where I am here today. And I'd have to say it's not so much of a departure and more so than a pivot. And so there's not so much difference from what I used to do then than I do now. What's funny is my work has been often critiqued as being very graphical, which makes perfect sense because I used to be a graphic designer. But I feel like it was more my role as an art director that really played a key role to where I am now. Working as an art director, you'd still have to come up with a vision for a product or a selling season, be able to articulate it to an executive team, have buy-in from them, and then be able to work together with your web team, your broadcast team, your in-store team to make sure that that's executed cohesively between all those channels. And at the heart of that, I feel like it's not too far off from where we are today. And I think just like with any good interior designer or architect, I think it's about asking the right questions and being a really good listener. Because I think at the end of the day, we have to be able to work together with someone who can't quite realize what they're asking for and be able to translate that into magic. But working on the agency side also gave me a lot of great business acumen. Working in a corporate environment, it helped me understand the importance of best business practices, processes, production management, and more importantly, how to work together with other creatives to collaborate to make the best possible work. So, where's Nancy? We talked about this before, and it's kind of an interesting story. So how did I get into lighting, you might ask? Well, outside of slightly always being obsessed with lighting and design, it wasn't necessarily an overnight decision. I'll tell you, I don't know how many of you guys believe in serendipity or signs, but what I can tell you is it was nearly 10 years ago I was sitting right there on a couch, and this one light caught my eye. And it was a really peculiar light. So here it was this really like overly simplistic light that had, a base with a very thin stem to it, what looked like a tea diffuser weld to it, and then from that there was all these wispy wires with beads on the end that almost looked like specks in orbit. It was really quite the contraption. But it wasn't until you turned off the lights, and turned it on, that you got to see the magic. All this simple framework went away, and you were left with this glowing orb that looked like it had specks in orbit around it. Frankly, it was genius. It was a real aha moment for me. And I came to realize it wasn't so much the sum of the parts, because some of the parts looked like you could just pick them up from around the house. But it was really more the intrinsic way in which they were put together. A little did I know that this light by Ingo Maurer would soon change my life and inspire me to get into lighting. And today he's still one of my design heroes. Funny little anecdote. It's really not wasted on me too that to have this kind of real surreal meta moment of being full circle, that I'm now here talking about it when it all started 10 feet away from where I'm talking. So it's quite a trip. Well, not too far after this epiphany, I actually bought my first place. And I decided to completely gut it to make it the way I wanted. And always being a bit of a tinkerer, I'd built several pieces of my own furniture in my place, but it was actually when I had my first hand at doing lighting. But it wasn't until a random dinner guest that actually came by that the right person got to see my work, and things really started to take off. Impressed that I was able to make my own lighting, a light bulb quite literally went off for the both of us, and I was quickly commissioned to do my first commercial project just down the street from where I lived. As the story goes, I literally made my first light in a parking lot across the street from my place with some hand tools and a blowtorch. And it wasn't too long after this that one job landed me another job, and I decided to leave the comforts of my corporate career and actually start working together with this electrical engineer who discovered my work. And this afforded me to not only to work together with him to help bring a lot of expertise in electrical, but then also help on my side, but also helped him with production management. And really, it helped me gain a lot more aspects on the technical end of things, especially when this transition wasn't that easy. Going from a white-collar job that you worked your whole career to get to transition to a blue-collar job was tough at times. I'd be on ladders, getting cut up, dirty pulling wire all day. I'd be on the top of Coquitlam Center, changing out a variable frequency drive, and I'd be on the phone with a client from an architecture firm in California trying to make both things balance out. But I knew I needed to blast through this in order to and learn as much of this as possible, because this was going to help me get to me where I wanted to go. It gave me this real-life experience in understanding electrical and structural engineering, and what it takes to make installations a lot easier. It wasn't long after that the lighting company started to take and get momentum. So I made the natural decision that we parted ways. And what's funny is, although I always wanted to get into product, I quickly found myself in this niche market of custom lighting. And I know there's a few people I've seen around here who I got to work with kind of on the early days with some of my custom lighting, and we still do a fair bit of it. But it was great to be able to work with interior designers and architects to build very site-specific installations that wouldn't necessarily be readily available off the shelf. But inherently with doing all this custom work, you're kind of building a product line as you go. And it afforded me the opportunity to realize some of our products, as well as have a multitude of iterations in doing so. So is the case with one of our most popular products, Halo. Excuse me, I'll take another drink. It's unfortunate, I just got a text right before I came on here with the original designer. Andrew McLean was the person who actually originally commissioned me to do this, where she originally commissioned me to create a custom chandelier for the VIP booth at IDS in 2014 that was sponsored by this Italian Prosecco company called Bottega Gold. So if you know the company, you recognize their very iconic gold bottle, and when you think of Prosecco, you think of the bottles. So I was challenged with the task of creating an installation that kind of spoke to the brand. And I very handedly took the inspiration of not only the bottle itself, but the graphical language that the effervescence made. And so, as chance may have it, this loop idea had been banging around my head in my sketchbook for quite some time. And so when we first sat down with Andrea, I remember just scribbling it out on a napkin. She's like, "What? You just came up with that?" And it was approved on the spot. A napkin drawing was approved. And 3 weeks later, we designed, built it, and it was at IDS. And one of the things that we really wanted to do, we've got my friends here from Loch Morris who built out the booth around it, but we really wanted to make sure that this VIP area with this light kind of undulated out of the VIP booth, so it didn't matter what part of the exhibition that you were in, you would see this two-story installation as almost a bit of a beacon for the trade show. And you can find it no matter where you were in the show. So after this debut, it received considerable amount of attention and further on some accolades. And so again, it afforded us some time to not only to refine it and customize it and diversify it. And although optically it looks the same as it always has, I think we're on round 11 versions of it. But it still remains one of our hottest sellers to date. But it's funny, I get asked all the time, I'm sure you've got the dawn light up here now. I get asked all the time where I find a lot of my inspiration. And I often respond, usually it finds me. I think as designers, we kind of walk around with a kind of a different lens on, and we navigate the world a little bit differently. And oftentimes, inspiration strikes when you least expect it. So it was a few years ago that I was actually out for a dinner party, and I was sitting beside a friend of mine, and she had this really striking set of earrings on. And I bashfully, complimented her on her style choices, and I politely asked, "Would you mind if I take a photo of your earrings? Because one day I want to make a light out of it." It's funny things happen when you put these thoughts in motion. Because as luck may have it, it was only a few months later that I was asked and commissioned to create a custom piece for a very discerning client for their high-end home. And they were looking for something very sporadic in nature and very organic, but also something very polished, akin to jewelry. And so needless to say, I felt this was the perfect opportunity to bring this to fruition. And so from original drawings to final execution, this was going to be one of our most luxurious lights. We built everything literally from scratch. If that started off with a solid billet of brass that was water jet cut, and then CNC to put the chamfers and all the threading in it, to then finally hand polishing them, every single component of this was handmade. One of the biggest challenges that we found, though, was at the time, there wasn't an LED bulb on the market that had this kind of a seamless connection with our coupler. And we didn't want this to appear, we're spending all this time and money on making this thing look as beautiful as possible. We don't want it to look off the shelf. So we worked together with actually a chemical glass blower who traditionally uses or builds graduated cylinders and beakers to create these diffuser with machine-like tolerances so we get this nice seamless fit and achieve what we're after. And so you can see here then we would then take these pieces of glass and marry them up with their couplers and then very carefully epoxy them together and carefully assemble the whole light to then come to what you see now. And so similarly with Halo, once this piece was published, a lot of requests started to come in, and so we found ourselves with a new product. And so we had to come up with a name for it. And what's kind of funny is that seeing as these custom tubes kind of perfectly diffuse the light, but there's this kind of slight gradation, glowing gradation, kind of similar to the rising sun. I would actually be remiss to say, or not to mention, that the original inspiration also came from my friend, Dawn. Here it is in situ. Okay. Anyone else parched? No? Just me? Yeah. Okay, most recently, the newest addition to our line is our Mila pendants. I feel like today, I feel like a lot of our work has been critiqued as being kind of edgy, yet elegant, refined, but somewhat masculine. So I sought to do something a little bit different and trying to soften it up and make things a little bit more delicate with more, softer geometric forms. So as the story goes, the original design actually happened in 2015 when we were approached by Gensler, California, to be able to do a project for them in the States. And as we typically do, we pitched 3 different concepts, and sadly, the one that's up now didn't get picked, and it landed on the cutting room floor. But fast forward to about a year and a half ago, they contacted us again for a new project, and while working on this, they dug up this old concept, and it had been approved for this new project. So it was great to kind of resurrect this and see it to completion. But in developing this a little bit further, it became obvious that this would be a perfect fit for our line as well. So we continued, much like all of our products, we continued to refine it and get it to a good place that it would be production ready. But it also allowed us to go back to some of our roots where when we first started off, we were doing a lot of glass blowing and doing a lot of glass work for some of our projects. So it allowed us to work with a lot of artisan glass blowers to create these beautiful pieces that kind of look delicately balanced on these soft geometric forms. Now, I'm not sure if this is subconscious or not, but during the time, actually my wife was pregnant. And the forms that we created were very reminiscent about the way she was holding her belly. And so after the birth of our first daughter, that coincided with the launch of this new product, it felt only fitting to call it Mila after my daughter. There she is there. She's home today, not here. It's funny, I'll just go back here. She was actually in labor in this picture. when we were just like, are you going to show that picture? I was in labor there. I'm like, oh, no, it's cool. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay. Like I said, so we have a lot of product that we are slowly starting to release, but we do a fair bit of custom work. And last year we were approached by Oddly Gensler, again, we do a lot of work with them, to do a custom installation for EA's new head office, or sorry, not new head office, they were renovating their office in Burnaby. And, if you're remotely a gamer, this is like Mecca. And so we were given a lot of creative freedom to come up with whatever we wanted. The brief was only, it's got to be somewhat linear and it's got to look industrial. Sweet. So doing what we do, we gather as much information as possible. We gather drawings and mood boards and other details, because you never know how that can inform the creative process. But what's funny is after receiving the deck, I passed through a schematic of their entire campus. And I was like, holy shit, their campus looks like the Millennium Falcon. And for those of you who aren't as big a nerd as I am, that's Han Solo's ship from Star Wars. So needless to say, this sent me down a path of sourcing images and entry points at what we could see or what we could do. But I quickly identified that there was this kind of iconic graphical language that would appear in the Death Star. Again, for people who aren't in the know, the Death Star is a large starship that has the potential to destroy planets. And that was something that's where we kind of started. And so what we did is we started to create these lights or the idea was to create these lights that had these kind of periods and dashes, and playing with this kind of underlying nod to some of the stuff that you would see on the Death Star, as wild as that sounds. And I got to be honest, I was a little bit nervous to pitch this to the powers that be. Like, am I going to be laughed out of this room? So when I got in front of them, I had the whole architecture team, the big exec team, I had the owner, and I was walking down the path of my rationale, and I kid you not, his exact words like, holy shit, our campus looks like the Millennium Falcon, which is pretty wild. Not to mention it was a title that they produced, so it was a slam dunk. And a couple months later, we produced these lights. They were a series of 65 individual random pendants that kind of just hung in elevation above their new cafeteria. And I've always wondered, though, if anyone kind of picked up on that, but we'll never know. So quickly building a breadth of work and starting to garner a lot of attention, it afforded me the opportunity to do a lot of full carte blanche work and creating some of my own personal signature pieces, and many of which have been floating around in my head or my sketchbook for years. And so some of these ideas were larger than life and still are, but they needed the right space to be able to execute on this vision. So what started off as a very simple 2D hand sketch mosaic drawing later evolved into something that I now call my Shattered series. And playing with this kind of graphical aesthetic and turning it into something much more larger than life, it was this simple sketch that actually turned out to be probably one of our biggest projects to date. In building the first one out, I believe it was about 15 feet by 30 feet and weighed about 3,000 pounds. And what we did is we took every one of these shapes, as you can see in the image. We were taking raw steel, rolling it, folding it up, mounting all of our LEDs inside of it, having water jet cutting all the acrylic. It was just absolutely incredibly labor intensive. And not only that, but we started to find that it wasn't rigid enough, especially when you're talking about some of these larger spans. And so there's another image of it when it was fully assembled. And here it is in situ. This is actually, we did in the early days, did a lot of work with Earls, and this was Earls in Boston that we had done. That's the first Shattered series that we had done. And so we had actually another time to had a kick at the cat and come up with a second iteration of it. And in this case, it was actually twice as big. It was closer to like 30 feet by 50 feet. And so as a result, and taking the learnings from the first one that we done, we actually created our own custom extrusion and produced over 1,000 feet of this extrusion, where we were able to then have a profile for the acrylic to sit in place, had a home for the LED strips. And so they were also a lot easier to miter and weld together to have this very, very precise angles and geometric shapes as you see here. Not only that, but although it was twice as big, it was half the weight of the first one. So it afforded us to not only make it the shipping costs go down, but here it is here in situ in Earls in Virginia. But it also allowed us to have less visible gear and less visible distraction, and also have it seemingly to be suspended quite effortlessly. And so it was a true work of engineering. And here's another image of it. So we continue to improve our products through iteration and refinement, and it's always been a big driver for me. However, I think it's important for me to share the creative process never ends when the product is hit the market or the commission is hung. Secretly, one of my favorite parts is actually the photography part. Maybe that's a little bit the art director coming back out of me. And I love taking photography and sharing it of my work. And oddly enough, this last Shattered series that we had shipped, I wanted to photograph it before it left the shop. And so although it was too big to assemble in the shop, like it would be almost the length of this room, we decided to build out a portion of it. And truth be told, unfortunately, my wife couldn't be here today because she's taking care of Mila. Truthfully, this shoot that I wanted to do was inspired by my wife, who opened up my eyes to the nuances of dance and how dancers create beautiful shapes with their bodies and different forms to help tell a story. And in directing the shoot, I was specifically inspired by the mother of modern dance, Martha Graham. If you don't know who she is, I learned about her through my wife. She was very famous for her choreography, I can't say that word properly, excuse me, and known for Lamentation, which was kind of the first of its kind. And for those of you who don't know, it was a lot of experiments with fabric and shapes and form, and really helped bring contemporary dance to where it is today. With that in mind, I called the dancer friend up, turned on the shadow light, turned on some music, and asked her to just move organically, and just whatever she felt the light and ambiance created and made her feel. The end result was more than I could have asked for, and you can see some of the photos here. And I think a lot of it had to do, I didn't do it for really any other reason than just playing with an idea with reckless abandonment, just inspired by some of the work that we've done and the mood that it created. And I felt like some of it kind of blurred the line between art and design. So needless to say, my process has never been linear, and ideas are constantly gnawing at me for more until I'm able to kind of wring them out for everything that they're worth. I think much of the chagrin of most of the guys I work with, because I'm constantly changing things, making these less, and less visible gear. But I think having this humble approach has kind of always been my MO. And I think that comes from having this art background, that I'm really sensitive to it. And like I said, I feel like as a designer, we walk around with this different lens on. We're kind of always seeking inspiration. And in that, there's creativity. And saying that, it also creates these access points for creating something new. This type of vulnerability provides you the opportunity to make things better when you collaborate. And I think most creatives are actually dying for someone to discover us, or have the feeling of doubt when people actually do, which is kind of interesting, but that's never really been my path. In the end, I hope I leave you today with something to consider in your own creative process, and perhaps getting a glimpse into mine help you with that. And I'll leave you with this. Like Steve Martin said, be so good that they can't ignore you, and know that there's room for you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. It was really great to hear about your process. Just because I know there's a lot of my students here, you talked a little bit about your experience in Ryerson, and it's kind of a two-parted question. I'm taking advantage of holding the mic. One is, what would you tell a student now to kind of that you wish you would have known, if I could do it all over again kind of thing? And two, if you were in my position of an academic that could actually, what would you offer a student?
I don't think you're going to like my answer. It's, don't get me wrong, I come from a family of teachers. My mom's a teacher, my sister's a teacher. And I think it's really important, schooling, for sure. I think my experience was, not only did it teach me a lot of the academic part of what I do, but more so, I think it really helped build character, because at a young age, you're out of your folks' place, you're out on your own, you're living on your own, you're supporting yourself. So I think there's something bigger at play there. That being said, I think there's definitely a place for people in trades or very specialized careers. But I also have to say there's something to be said about just going out and tasting as many things as possible as well. There's a great quote I heard not too long ago, like, you can't read about push-ups. And I love that. I often say that you really got to pay attention to where you are right now. And if there's anything that I tried to get across in this talk, was that wherever you go, you take you with you. And so whatever you're doing right now, pay attention, because you don't know how that's going to culminate in the future. If that's from learning typesetting, so then you're able to create your own logos later on, or you're able to be, you're in journalism, so you know how to write really well, and then it helps you to become a producer of film. Our lives kind of take all these different directions. I think there was an old statistic where most people change their careers, I think 3 or 4 times. I think a recent millennial statistic is that they're going to change 9. And so embrace it. And so, what you may have spent, your parents' fortune on to go to school for may not be what you end up doing. So I think it's just being a little bit open to it. Thank you. If we don't get questions, I'll start pointing people out.
Thank you, Matthew.
Oh, we got one right here.
I will wait.
Oh, there.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much. I have been following you since I was still in design school 4 years ago. And you probably always know me through my name, Anna Hidlu. I always follow you on every project that you have. Now I'm teaching presentation design to the LaSalle College students. A few of my students are here too. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. I want to mostly ask and know a bit more about what do you think about the multidisciplinary designers?
Sorry, what was that last part?
Multidisciplinary design. Disciplinary design.
Oh, multi-exhibiting design?
Yeah. And what would be your feedback about students who wants to practice different disciplines? Thank you.
I see nothing wrong with that. I think getting your hands dirty in a multitude of things, like I said, I think I'm remiss to say that if you want to be pigeonholed into one particular thing, it's great if you can hone in on one. But just because you are a lighting designer doesn't mean you can't be a shoe designer too. I think there's a similar acumen that comes with it. But it's up to the designer to kind of find their home, and we say it on my team, hone it and own it. And I think by trying as many things, I think there's a certain authorship that comes about from it. And I just think of the people I respect the most or admire the most are the people who have their own voice, who are quintessentially them. But I don't think that's from just focusing on one thing. I think you can pull inspiration from a lot of different things. So I know that's kind of a roundabout answer, so I would say just try everything.
Talking stick. Thank you. I'm just absolutely fascinated how you made the transition from working in an ad agency into not only product design, but also marketing and production, because there's quite a lot there. So I'm just wondering if you can sort of give us more insights on that.
Absolutely. I think, no one person is a one-man army. I think a lot of it has been not only some of my own past experience, but then also, look, I'm a big proponent of surrounding yourself with good people. I'm very cognizant of that. My mom always told me, you lie down with fleas, you lie down with dogs, you get fleas. And so I think it's really important that you surround yourself with great people. I have some of the people I get to work with on a daily basis here. As far as if that's production and scaling up. When I first started off, like I mentioned, the first lights I was building in a parking lot across the street from my house. Shortly thereafter, I moved into my father-in-law's garage and very quickly outgrew that because we needed much bigger space and we needed a lot more technical prowess. And so we started to team up with a lot of different manufacturers. But I think that also afforded me to, again, talking about this kind of a humble approach, I think it's important to, what I would always do is I would have some of these drawings or some of these concepts or prototypes I've created. And, I go to the glass blowing example where we had this chemical glass blower that, he's used to doing graduated cylinders and beakers, and I'm asking him to make a light bulb. Oftentimes by approaching someone in that way and be like, look, this is what I'm trying to do. How would you do it? And, this person may have 30 plus years on you and help elevate your design much further than you could have taken it yourself. And I think that's that collaborative spirit of ensuring that you've got those people around you that really helps you not take baby steps, but leaps. But I think, again, it's kind of, you really have to take a holistic approach. And I kind of mentioned it at the beginning that, it's great to be a designer, it's great to be a maker, but what is it that you want to do with your business? Do you want to be able to scale it up? Or maybe you just want to have these artisan pieces that you hand build every single one yourself, and that is great. That's super awesome. A lot of the time now, I'm not as much involved with production anymore. We have special teams that take care of it, and they can do a far better job than I could ever have done. But that's not been without a few bumps in the road. But I'm really, really happy with the people I surround myself with and I get to work with. Because let's face it, when you're out on your own, you're doing your own thing, guess what? You don't have to work with anybody. You don't have, you've got an asshole you're working with, guess what? You don't have to work with them anymore. You can just let them go or not continue a contract. But so you get to work with people, and I think that's kind of always been a distinction for me. And I try never to, in my business, ever use I. It's always we, because it is a team effort. Thanks. Oh, we got a question over there.
Hi, Matthew. I have a question. So I think here, your lighting is conceptual and it's different. That's what I like. But as designers, we rely on technical specifications. So my question is, how do you test your light for the lumens output, or is there any tests done?
Yes. Every single one of our products is CSA tested, UL listed. That's a real important part of what we do because we deal with a lot of specifiers from around the world. And so making sure that we are compliant. I think it's funny, a lot of people can draw pretty pictures. It's a lot different when you're designing things that can be maintained. How do you ship them? How do you get it in the packaging? How are you going to pass certification? Is everything to code? It's all the unglamorous stuff. I jokingly say to some of my furniture friends, I'm like, I wish I just made furniture because when you're done, you're done. But there's so many more hoops that you have to jump through with lighting. Like you say, like understanding lumen output, understanding your CRI values, making sure that a place can actually be lit appropriately is something that we take very seriously, and that's where we leverage a lot of our custom know-how because we do work with a lot of lighting engineers. And so knowing that sort of information, I think also kind of sets you apart. And I kind of see there's two different divisions in what we do. We have the 100% bespoke over on one end, and then we have our product line on the other, and we kind of have this happy medium in the middle where we can take some of our existing product line and take a little bit of our custom know-how and make lights that, we can take our standard Dawn, and we've done 8-story versions of it, all using the exact same components. But again, really understanding the logistics of all the certifications, all the electrical requirements, and it's different around the world. Luckily for us, Canada has probably one of the strictest compliance codes there is, and so usually it's just a matter of swapping out drivers or anything like that to make them work and be compliant elsewhere. But again, I think that comes with experience for sure.
And is there a warranty on your lighting? Like you say?
Yeah, everything. Most of our lights have at least a 1-year warranty.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Hey, Michael, how are you? My name is Suraj, and I work for Live Interiors, and I'm part of the HR team. So I was invited here by LaSalle kind of just to understand more about the creative side, with interior design. My question is that, from your experience, when you look from an employer's perspective, inspiration, everyone kind of gets bogged down with projects, deadlines, all these things. And I think that what I want to try to cultivate at where I work is that leaving that time for creativity and inspiration. So what type of recommendations could you provide or think of that employers could actually place in the workplace where it gives designers that time, in between or during the day to really just think about what they're working on, how they can bring that creativity to their role versus the 9 to 5 at home, recharging back at the office?
That's a great question. What we implemented in my team, even when I was a team of 2, oftentimes, I've got a bunch of mentors. I'm like, when do I set up this? When do I do that? And they're like, when's now a good time to start? And wouldn't it be a lot nicer to start with 2 people before you're 20 and trying to start implementing things? And so every day we have a standing meeting at 8 a.m. And 8 a.m., we're able to talk about things that we're working on, hurdles that we've got, anything that needs support on, as well as, although we do need to get back to it, we did for a while have instated Fridays from 3 to 5. It was just inspiration sessions where we would all bring work that we're working on and kind of show it. And this could be someone who's a designer or a product manager or someone who's in ops. And so I think it really can come from anywhere, but you really need to carve out the time. How do you get your hair cut? You can't just roll up. You got to make an appointment. And so we carve out that time to do that, both in the morning on a daily basis, as well as we're trying to become a little bit better at making sure that there's actual time carved out for just nothing but ideation. I got you, brother. We did have someone over there. Are we still good? Yeah, yeah. Nancy, just in the corner.
Hi, Matthew. Thanks for coming. I'm an industrial designer, and I had a question about your halo design. That's very cool. That actually reminds me of a design I worked on in the UK years and years ago for the 2D bulb.
Okay.
Nobody will remember because I'm an old guy. It was the Thorn 2D lamp.
Yeah.
It was essentially actually a square shape.
Oh, interesting.
With a transformer in the middle, and that was state of the art. So this halo design of yours, Matthew, we were thinking of buying a number of them from either you or, we noticed online a company called Caris, I think. Caris Enterprises actually has them too. So was it a co-design deal that you guys got? So I've got two questions. Was it a co-design deal that you had with Caris? And what do you think about, advice to students and designers here when you're working with a shop or a manufacturer? How do you deal with the issues of ownership and, privacy and intellectual property? Any advice on that?
Oh, absolutely. I could definitely talk some time about that. Needless to say, yes. When I first started off, like I said, when we needed to be able to scale up. We needed to start working with people that could help us do that. And I think, kind of naively, we kind of worked without contracts, with goodwill, with some of the stuff that we were producing. Everything started funneling through this one company. But the design, I think the more important thing is the importance of the idea. And without that, none of this can happen. And so, although the idea resonated from us, prototyped from us, and then we worked together with manufacturers to help produce it at scale, being very diplomatic about it, that's why it's very important to be cognizant of who you're working with. And yes, we did work with them for a period of time, and there's a reason why we don't anymore. And, the people we get to work with now understand our vision, understand our ethics, and they align. And so I'd recommend to any designer, be it student or established, to making sure that, you're, in this part, you're working with your head. And I had to learn this one the hard way. And so making sure you have things like non-disclosure agreements, making sure you have NDAs, because you want to make sure that you're protecting your IP. We had an incident that happened just the other day where someone brought to my attention that they found some of my work in a store in China that clearly wasn't ours. And I'm like, yes, we've made it. But, but when, old colleagues or previous manufacturers are starting to do that, it's too small of a city, too small of an industry to be doing that sort of stuff. And so, I think the writing's on the wall, we definitely try to protect ourselves and copyright things. But yes, definitely, without getting too much into it, it's not something you want to mess with when you're starting off with, so make sure you protect yourself. But great question.
coming.
Hi, Matthew. I was wondering, so you went from being an art director to making your first piece in a car park. Where on earth did you learn to weld?
Sorry, what's that?
Where on earth did you learn to
Oh, it
weld?
was blowtorch. So we just had like settling tanks and stuff like that. We just pulled out of the van. When we was doing the electrical contracting part, we had a service van, so everything just pulled out of there.
But how did you know how to do it? Where did you learn?
You know, it's funny you ask that, because it all comes from, I think, being a kid. I remember being young, and me and my brother and some street friends, we used to sneak out at night, and we used to go to some of the construction sites nearby. We were really young. And we'd snipe some wood, and we would sneak into one of our friends' backyards, and we'd build skateboard ramps and all crazy, our workbenches and furniture for our garage and our hangout spots. And so I think it was, and not to mention then, that's what really made me liking to take shop in high school. And there was always this, it was just a different form of a creative outlet. If it's a blowtorch or a pen or what have you, it's a tool that helps you kind of see your vision. And so it's just, sometimes I wouldn't say I'm the best welder in the world, but it's playing with it. It's the fun part. We got a question there.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm also a product designer, and my question was, what's next for you? So you've kind of talked a little bit about the brand that you've made. You've done custom. Is there a desire to work with more other brands to kind of elevate you as a designer, or is the idea, you talked a little bit about scalability, is what's next, kind of?
I feel like to be honest, we're running 1,000,000 miles an hour in a month and 1,000,000 different directions, which is all great. I think right now we're in a period of growth. We're building our team. It's all the unglamorous stuff. So it's setting up inventory, ERP systems, CRMs, having best practices and procedures, and onboarding procedures. So when people come on, they can kind of simulate right away, and we can hit the ground running. But I see the vision of the company being a little bit more of a kind of a creative house, where you think of companies such as Floss or Roll & Hill, where they work together collaboratively with a lot of other designers as kind of a collective. And I've had the great fortune of working with some designers in that capacity already. We have my friends from Lock & Mortis here who were responsible for the original design of the line lights. And I remember Ryan had it in his place, and I was like, man, those are so rad. And, we decided to hey, maybe we got something here, and we kept on refining it and getting it to a good place. And that's where I see us going in kind of the long term, is to create, like I kind of mentioned, I think a lot of designers usually sell their designs or, get a licensing deal. Because to start up your own gig, set up your own manufacturing, set up your own business, it's a lot more work, but if it was easy, everyone would do it. And that's kind of the line I'm going down right now. But in the more the immediate future, it's to continue to build the team, but also start to build new product. I think very intentionally, we do have a very small collection, and that was intentional, because you don't want to, put gas on a fire that you're not prepared for. And so I'm a big proponent of kind of organic, proper growth and putting things in place. How I got consultants for my consultants to make sure that, in my experience, this is what I know. What am I not seeing? And so it's really important to, again, part of that humble approach, but also having a bit of a vision of where you want to go, and surround yourself with people who are going to make you help you make those leaps. So I could kind of answer that question. But creating new product is something that we're working on this year, taking on bigger scale projects, and just continue to grow the brand.
Great. Thank you. Thank you
Excellent.
all. Oh, one more. We can't stop now yet, right? Yay.
I just wanted to ask, if you weren't doing this, and it, let's just say it didn't go well, what else would you be doing? Or let's just say this comes, because I think with any new business or any business that you're doing or any creative thing you're doing, it kind of comes to a point where you kind of want to branch out or do something different. So if you weren't doing this, what else would you be doing?
I know the first thing that came to mind was like, I'd be flying my drone. No, because... but you know, there's a little bit of truth to that. My wife makes fun of me all the time about it. She's like, because I go to my friends, I'm like, hey, you want to go flying today? And they're like, you're not flying, you're flying a drone. I'm like, well, I'm not going to say I'm droning, but there's something to be said about it. I've always liked visuals. There's a term called synesthesia, where oftentimes your senses get mixed up. And so for me, when I hear something, I see something. Now, you know, it's almost likened to when you smell something, it brings back a certain memory. It's very similar to that. For me, it would probably have to be something in the visuals. And, you know I joke about droning, but there's something to be said about seeing vantage points that no one's ever seen before that really appeals to me. Not only is it super cool to fly at 60 kilometers an hour, but it's just this kind of exploration that I love, and the cinematography of it all. I think it just kind of goes right back to the art direction part of it. I loved always working with other creatives, be it the talent, the producer, the photographer, the videographer. If I wasn't doing this, it would probably be something collaborative, something visual, something along those lines. Oh, we got one more over here.
Where? Oh, there. Okay.
Hey, Matthew.
Hey,
how's it going? I was just going to ask, so obviously you've come a very long way, but in the very beginning with your first few projects, what was your biggest obstacle, and what did you learn, and what advice could you give from that?
I think you kind of nailed it over here. It was just having the space. Like, truthfully, the very first light I ever did was for my home. And then I literally made my next one for a friend of mine on her kitchen table. But then, when we started getting into restaurants, it was just really trying to find the space to do it. Power requirements to run welders and some of the electricity needs to be able to build some of this stuff. That was kind of a barrier to entry for me. But again, I think if you could work together with people who can help catapult you or help take on some of that, is probably the best bet. But again, I've just prefaced that with making sure you protect yourself again. But I also think that, with the age of the internet and Instagram and things like that, you have the potential to really have some serious reach. And so I often say just get it out there. Even if it's half-baked, the last thing you want to do is have this idea bang around your head, and then next year it shows up in the magazines. You're like, not that there was anyone copying, but you're like, crap, that was kind of an idea that I had, and it's already been done. So showing your work, and getting it out there. I just remember with us, when we first got our first Instagram account, we started getting calls from Qatar, and I'm like, how the heck are you finding us? And but I think there's gone are the days where you don't necessarily have to send things to China. You don't have to be a ticketed welder or electrician. There's so much great software, if it's SketchUp or SolidWorks, or even the advent of some of the VR stuff. I think that's an area that really excites me right now. To be able to, it's great to be able to push things around and see a space in something like SolidWorks or primarily in SketchUp, but it'd be so much better to actually have it in real life size, where you could be like, oh, you know what, now that I'm here, this elevation doesn't feel right, and I need to take this and I want to make it bigger. And you're in the same room as your client or your manufacturer could be on the other side of the world. And so I think the technology part of it really excites me, because going back to my original answer, it's just another tool that can help you kind of visualize and get you to an end result maybe a lot quicker, but also exponentialize your success in collaboration.
Hi, Matthew. I'm a LaSalle student right now. And my question now is, we're in the middle of Design Week. And I remember just one thing now. Philip Stark said that by the end of the day, we're always just putting more stuff in the world. Like we're just adding things to the world. We're just actually creating products. What does design stand for? Why do you design things? Why are you creating more stuff? What do you use design for in the world and in your profession?
That's another great question. And, I think it's something that I ask myself all the time. I think Simon Sinek has a great TED Talk on YouTube. You should check it out. And kind of the circle of why and how you do things. And, I'll just kind of tell you really quickly, one of the things I always loved is how, you start with your why first and you kind of expand out. And some of the best auditors or companies understand that and start there first. And so, if he used the example of Apple. Apple's pitch has always been, we think different. We challenge the status quo. We build things just as beautiful on the outside as in the inside. We just so happen to buy computers. Would you like to buy one? That's a lot different than, we're a car company. Our car goes 300 miles an hour. We get this many miles to the liter. Do you want to buy a car? And so for me, understand that why. I think it kind of changes all the time. But if I were to, I kind of made mention to it in my talk where it's just scratching that itch. And I think that for me, I don't do it for anyone. I do it for me. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. Like, when you're a kid, you're not building your Lego starship to be put on a shelf somewhere. You're doing it because you think it's cool. And I think the distinction of doing it for other people versus doing it yourself, you're in a much better place to kind of find your own voice doing that. Because the world's a big place, and there's room for you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Matthew.